For years, they haunted the public, left families without answers, and baffled detectives. Cold cases, violent crimes with no leads, no suspects, and no closure. But with advancements in technology, these once unsolvable mysteries are now being cracked wide open. Today on BloodSpot, we're diving into 7 infamous cold cases that were finally solved thanks to breakthroughs in forensic technology. From the Golden State Killer to BTK Killer, prepare to see how modern science is helping justice catch up to those who thought they'd escaped. 1. Bear Brook Murders, DNA, and the Chameleon Killer. In 1985, a hunter stumbled upon a gruesome discovery in Bear Brook State Park, a metal drum containing the remains of a woman and a young girl. 15 years later, another drum was found nearby with the bodies of 2 more young girls. Investigators were at a loss. The victims had no identities and there were no clear suspects. Then, in 2017, a game-changing technique known as genetic genealogy came into play. DNA from the victims led to Terry Rasmussen, also called the Chameleon Killer, for his ability to hide his identity. Investigators found he was the father of one of the victims, but 3 others remained unknown. In 2019, amateur sleuth Becky Heath took matters into her own hands, scouring ancestry websites and finding a match to the Honeychurch family, whose daughter Marlise and her 2 children had disappeared around the same time. Using genetic genealogy, they confirmed the victims' identities. While Rasmussen died in prison in 2010, his horrific actions were finally revealed. 2. The Golden State Killer. DNA catches a decades-long predator. Between the 1970s and 1980s, California was terrorized by the Golden State Killer, a man responsible for 13 murders, 50 rapes, and over 100 home invasions. For years, police could only connect his brutal crimes by DNA samples left at scenes, but they had no way of identifying him. In 2018, investigators used online genealogy databases to match DNA collected from crime scenes to a distant relative. By building a family tree, they eventually identified Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer. They gathered DNA from his car door handle and a tissue he discarded, finding a perfect match. D'Angelo was arrested and sentenced, finally putting a face to the monster who had terrorized California for over a decade. 3. The Grim Sleeper, caught by familial DNA. The Grim Sleeper stalked vulnerable Black women in Los Angeles from 1984 to 2007, committing at least 10 murders. His nickname came from an apparent 14-year pause in his killing spree. Despite DNA linking the murders, police couldn't identify him for years. The break came in 2008, when the Grim Sleeper's son was arrested and submitted a DNA sample. Investigators found a familial match to DNA from the crime scenes, pointing to the father. In 2010, police gathered DNA from a slice of pizza left by Lonnie D. Franklin Jr., confirming his connection to the murders. In 2016, Franklin was convicted on 10 counts of first-degree murder, showing how familial DNA opened new doors for solving cases that had been cold for decades. 4. The I-65 or Days Inn Killer, traced with genetic genealogy. Between 1987 and 1990, a killer along the I-65 highway targeted women working in motels across the Midwest, murdering 3 and leaving 1 woman for dead. The killer eluded capture, despite investigators linking the attacks through DNA. For decades, there was no trace of the man behind these horrific crimes. In 2022, advancements in genetic genealogy led to a breakthrough. Investigators used DNA from ancestry databases to link the murders to Harry Edward Greenwell, who had died in 2013. While Greenwell can no longer face justice, the case brings closure to the families of his victims and shines a light on the power of genetic technology. 5. The Boston Strangler, a DNA match 50 years later. The Boston Strangler, also known as Albert DeSalvo, confessed to 13 murders in the 1960s, but his confession was met with skepticism, as there was no physical evidence connecting him to the crimes. DeSalvo was imprisoned for other offenses, but never for the murders. This left a dark cloud of uncertainty over Boston for decades. In 2013, police used DNA taken from DeSalvo's nephew's water bottle to find a familial match to DNA evidence from Mary Sullivan, one of the Strangler's victims. Investigators exhumed DeSalvo's body, confirming his DNA-matched samples from the crime scene. Finally, after 50 years, technology provided the definitive answer that DeSalvo was, in fact, the Boston Strangler. 6. Murders of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg, solved by a DNA spit kit. In 1987, Canadian couple Jay Cook and Tanya Van Coilenborg set out for Seattle but were found murdered days later. Their case went cold despite years of investigation. In 2015, Chelsea Rustad, a Washington resident, won a DNA testing kit and uploaded her profile to an ancestry database, unknowingly providing the key to solving the murders. Rustad's DNA shared similarities with crime scene DNA, leading investigators to her cousin, William Earl Talbot II. After DNA collected from Talbot himself confirmed the match, he was arrested and eventually convicted of the murders in 2019. This case highlights the unexpected ways technology and genealogy databases are solving cold cases and offering closure to families even decades later. 7. The capture of the BTK killer, using metadata. From 1974 to 1991, a man who called himself the BTK killer murdered 10 people in Kansas and taunted authorities with letters. For years, BTK was an enigma, and the case went cold after his letters stopped in the early 1990s. But in 2004, BTK killer couldn't resist the urge to reach out, sending another letter to the police. He asked if his identity could be traced through a floppy disk, and police encouraged him to send it. Investigators found metadata on the disk, linking it to a man named Dennis Rader. They then obtained DNA from his daughter and confirmed a familial match to DNA from his crime scenes. Rader was arrested in 2005, ending one of the most chilling cold cases in U.S. history. Which case do you think was the most surprising? And do you believe technology will eventually solve every cold case? Let us know in the comments below. If you're fascinated by cold cases, mysteries, and true crime, hit subscribe to join us on BloodSpot. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.